Okay, we can start.
Okay, so I'll put on my PPT. I'm a little slow with Zoom because this is not the usual platform I use. Hopefully, things will go smoothly. Okay, can you see my PPT? Yeah? Okay. All right, so let's begin our conversation. I'll give you an idea of what we are going to talk about today. Ethics in research per se is very expansive, and you can have endless debates on what is ethical and what is not. But I've had to delimit myself today, so this is what we are going to cover. We are going to talk about the meaning of ethics and the need for ethics. Because whether you've realized it or not, all your life, mum, dad, your teachers, your dadi, your nani have been discussing ethics with you in some way or the other. Then I'll also be talking to you about a few bodies that look into the ethics of research, particularly the APA and the BPS. We're also going to be talking about institutional review boards, summarized as IRB, but this will be very brief. I'm going to spend the bulk of my time discussing specific ethics of research with you, just say informed consent, ya confidentiality. Two very critical concepts that we'll be discussing today are deception and debriefing. Now, deception is a very interesting and alarming word when you are talking about ethics. Ethics में deception करना चाहिए, नहीं करना चाहिए, कब करना चाहिए, those are some of the things we'll talk about. And I will focus a little bit on animal research ethics. We humans are very self-obsessed. We keep talking about ethics in human research, but what about animals? So we'll talk a little about that today. So if I ask you, let me know in the chat box or speak up, what is the basic broad purpose of all psychological research? Ultimately, what do we want to accomplish out of the research that we do? Any ideas? Yes, Rohit, you've raised your hand.
To make human life more sustainable mentally.
Okay, to make human life more sustainable. Also, you mentioned at a mental level. Fine, great. Any other response? Alicia.
I personally feel that the purpose of research would be to gather information about certain areas and, if possible, contribute in a way that helps that area grow and also positively impacts the people in that area.
Very good. I especially like the last thing you said, positively impact people. Any other responses? Any other ideas? So Rohit and Alicia, you're both actually correct. If we look at the umbrella purpose of all research, whether it is in cognitive psychology, whether it is in biology, whether it is in physics, it is to enhance the well-being of humans, not only humans, even animals. And because all research is supposed to be pro-social in nature, well-being badhana hai. As a part of this goal, what is necessary is that all researchers operate ethically. All researchers make sure that they protect the rights of all participants, whether the participants are human or whether they are animals. You know why ethics are so important? Because in research, the psychologist becomes the expert. It's very easy for an expert to exploit people in the name of his or her expertise. But our aim is never to exploit. It is to enhance well-being, and that can only happen when we are ethical in our work. It's not only the participants of our research towards whom we have to show ethics. Certain other people also need to be included in our ethical approach. Who? Parents, relatives, friends, and colleagues of people that you are conducting the research on, they should also never be hurt or harmed by your research. And basically, when it comes to ethical dilemmas, one thing that usually guides us is a risk-benefit analysis. or a cost benefit analysis. And whenever you are taking a decision, particularly an ethical decision, the benefits of that decision, the benefits of that action must outweigh its costs. If the costs are too high and the benefits are too low, why would you take that action? So for any ethical action, do measure the benefits against the costs and go ahead if the benefits are greater in amount. To understand the real relevance of ethics, let's start with an actual experiment in psychology. There's something in the chat box. You've told me the purpose of research, Jisha, I think, to learn more about anything. Yeah. Knowledge generation is also a purpose of research. Now, let's start with an actual, very well-known classic research in the domain of psychology. I don't know if all of you are from psychology. A lot of my examples will be from psychology because that's the only subject I study and teach. Now, these experiments were by a psychologist called Harry Harlow. So in the 1950s, Harlow decides to do a series of experiments with animals. And the animals that he chooses are monkeys. Now, what he did back in the 50s, when discussions about ethics were not as intense as they are now, he removed young baby monkeys from their natural mothers a few hours after birth. He separated the babies from their mothers. And then he gave the babies two choices between two surrogate mothers. So the real mother was sent away. Now two surrogate mothers were presented to the baby monkey. One mother was made of soft cloth. You can see it in the picture. But this mother had no food to offer to the baby. The other mother was made of cold, hard wire. But that mother also had a milk bottle where baby could get the milk. Harlow wanted to observe which mother this baby monkey preferred. Did food matter more or the softness of the mother? The ability to hold on to the mother because she was soft. Findings showed that baby monkeys went to the wire mother, but only for food. And the rest of the time, they stayed with the cloth mother. And Harlow showed how important that maternal soft touch was for the baby. He went on to do more experiments. These were not his only experiments. What other experiment did he do? So he used a particular experimental procedure in which he got these baby monkeys to explore a new, strange room, either in the presence of their surrogate mother or in her absence. And he observed what the baby monkeys did. My PPT na beach mein gets stuck. So what the baby monkeys did was that if the soft cloth mother was there, they would use her as a secure base. What does it mean to use your mother as a secure base? When you're in a new room, you'll go idhar udhar, but then you'll come back to mom. You'll see now mom is there. Then you'll go thoda aur idhar udhar. Then you get a little scared and you come back to your mother. You know she's still there. Then you go and explore more. This is what you mean by using your caregiver as a secure base. And baby monkeys did that. When the surrogate mother was removed from the room, the young baby's behavior totally changed. Once they realized that their secure base had been lost, their surrogate mother was gone, the babies got really scared. Either they just froze or they started whimpering and they started crying. And all of this research started to show how important the primary caregiver was to the baby. And all of this started research in a psychological field called attachment. Psychologists started to take the child caregiver attachment very, very seriously. Because these classic studies open the doors for so much more research in psychology, especially in the field of child development, these studies were very celebrated. Harry Harlow is a very well-known psychologist. But do you see a problem here? Apart from all the fancy findings, what's the problem? You know, additional experiments. Harry Harlow didn't stop here. He did lots of experiments in which he deprived babies of their mothers and found out that the babies get so distressed that they can even die. The problem with the experiments was in what? Would you celebrate an experiment of such nature? Any responses? Yes, Rohit?
I think there was like no consent taken, I think so, from the animal. I know that this might make people laugh, but I feel that separating someone like immediately after birth, it was like very negative and goes against civilization. I was feeling that in ethics context.
Now, while Harry Harlow may have adopted very good designs, been very methodical, been very particular, opened up areas of new research, the problem was from the ethical angle. Now that we look back, this piece of work may be a classic or whatever, but from an ethical perspective is deeply criticized because it is essentially seen as cruel. All the babies who were separated from their mothers suffered a lot of emotional harm. And in female monkeys, the separation from their mothers created a tremendous state of anxiety. And these female monkeys, when they themselves became mothers, did not know how to handle their young because they had grown up with a wire mother or a cloth mother. So these female monkeys actually, when they had young of their own, ended up neglecting their babies or abusing their babies. And finally, these kinds of experiments were, by Harlow were halted in the mid-1980s. He started in the 50s. They were only halted in the mid-1980s once the APA said that you have to stop treating people and animals like objects and subjecting them to whatever you want. So unfortunately for us, psychology's history is marked by such unethical practices, and it's experiments like these that have fueled the need for discussing and debating on ethics. So now let me come to a more formal question. What are research ethics? Ethics hota kya hai? Would anyone like to just share their understanding of what ethics means? Or maybe a synonym, another word for ethics? Anybody can. Okay.
I think guidelines.
I don't know who's speaking. Could you let me know?
Meghna.
Meghna. Yeah, Meghna.
Yeah, so I think they are generally guidelines that you need to follow so that rights of the participants don't get violated.
Okay, fine, very good. Any other responses? Guidelines so that no one is violated. That's a very good response. Anyone wants to build on that? Anything in the chat?
Tisha mentioned mortality.
Morality.
Morality, sorry, I'm so sorry. Morality.
Morality, absolutely. Morals and ethics is often used interchangeably, right? Another word for ethics that we use is code of conduct. So research ethics, if you come down to a definition, refers to certain moral principles which guide research. They guide research from the inception point to the completion point to even publication. The research process is often a long one. There is not one moment in that entire process that you can afford to be unethical. Your ethical workings have to begin with the beginning of your research and only end with the ending of your research. Or maybe your ethics will continue even after your paper has been published. For ethical reasons, some kinds of research are best completely avoided. Maybe the knowledge they would have generated is great, but the ethical problems are so much that it's best not to do those researches. Can you think of any example of a research which will tell us a lot, but ethically speaking, it's just not worth it? Can you think of anything like that? Yes, Rohit?
Ma'am, before like during World War II,
Yes.
Hitler did many such research projects in his Germany, which were like ethically very much wrong,
Yes.
and due to which many people suffered a lot. But because of that ethical research, a lot was contributed in medical field, and that was very much criticized at that time.
That's true. That's true. It was basically in the concentration camps where the Jews were, or people of color were put through these scientific experiments which were very cruel and without taking any kind of consent from them. If you are generating knowledge by forcing people and torturing people, is the knowledge really worth it? Would you like to be tortured in the name of knowledge? So, the kind of
Honestly, not at all.
not at all, right? Yeah, none of us would. We have our dignity. We don't want to be tortured in the name of anything, including knowledge. Another example would be deliberately causing brain damage to someone to see its impact on personality. I mean, it's very important for us to understand the connections between the brain and personality. But are you going to deliberately brain damage people to understand that? No. If someone, God forbid, experiences brain damage and there are certain changes that happen in their personality, that's a situation you can stand back and study. But you can't go around brain damaging people. Another example would be that if a woman is pregnant, you deliberately deprive her of food to see what happens to the fetus when she is malnourished. You cannot be doing that to people. So those kinds of researches are just not worth it. Now we come to the golden questions for today's session. What is ethically acceptable in research? Kya chalta hai? What is ethically unacceptable in research in these modern times simply does not work, not permitted. And another question, who tells us what is ethical and unethical? Am I supposed to rely on my own conscience? Am I supposed to rely on your conscience? Who do I listen to decide what is ethical and what is not? So we don't have any such parallel body in India. Even psychologists in India usually refer to two international bodies when it comes to ethical decisions. There is the British Psychological Society, which has a lot of literature on ethical kya hai aur kya nahi hai. But even more well known is the APA, the American Psychological Association. It's the APA guidelines which are forever, I think, guiding most of the world. देख लेते हैं BPS क्या है. The British Psychological Association is a body of psychologists in the UK. Very old organization. It was established in 1901 at the University College, London. Even today, this is the basic guiding force of psychologists in the United Kingdom. And their aim is to maintain certain standards of training and practice in psychology. They have something called the Code of Ethics, which is supposed to guide the ethical behavior of all researchers in the UK. Chalo, theek hai. What is the American Psychological Association? This is the largest professional organization of psychologists in the United States, so across the Atlantic. It is even older than the BPS. This was founded in 1892, when psychology was a very young subject. It identifies principles and standards for American psychologists to use when they are making ethical decisions. But because we don't really have a body of our own, we constantly look for guidance to the APA principles. I'll share those principles with you today. Before moving on, I want to briefly mention something that I was actually requested to mention, otherwise I never bring this up. There is a document called the Belmont Report. Now, it is just in terms of knowing a little bit of history and trivia, this report was created in the United States. The United States had a body called National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. So the purpose of the whole research was protection of human subjects whenever they participate in research. This was issued in 1978 and has certain very strong, clear-cut ethical principles. But now in psychology, this report has essentially been replaced by the APA ethical principles. And the APA ethical principles incorporate what the Belmont report says. So we will go to APA now and try to understand what their ethical practices are. You have heard of the APA probably if you are a student of psychology. Which are the ethical practices that you are aware of? If you are aware of any, feel free to say them aloud or put them in the chat box. जो भी आपको आते हैं. And if you don't know any, it's perfectly okay to say, Dr. Dhillon, well, I don't know any. Don't know any. Okay, okay, fine. Can I have a few more responses just to know the base knowledge level? Informed consent, Anupriya. Okay, good. Good, good. New. Informed consent, risk, confidentiality and privacy. Good. Confidentiality. Okay, okay. So many of you have some idea. Today, let's take a holistic look on what ethical principles APA expects psychologists to follow. There are actually 5 principles that they essentially talk about. The first one is called beneficence. Every research that you do should be benefiting other people. If your research is only going to benefit you, that is very unfortunate. It should be benefiting other people at least as much as it benefits you. नहीं तो researchers, just research for मेरी publication हो जाएगी. That should not be the goal. The goal has to be to improve society. The second ethic that we must follow is responsibility. Be responsible researchers and perform our professional duties with utmost care. The third ethical principle is of integrity. Be honest and accurate. Do you know the scope of lying that exists when you are a researcher? Doing a research that only you have access to. Where do you think a researcher can very easily lie and be dishonest? In their data. Can you imagine? I'm supposed to get my questionnaires filled out by 100 people. I don't send them to anyone. I fill all 100 questionnaires out myself so that I get exactly the result that I want. कौन रोक लेगा मेरे को? And then I'll claim कि oh मैंने तो 100 participants से I got this filled. It's so easy to be dishonest, which is why you are constantly reminded that the biggest disservice you can do to humanity is to fake data. Fake your results. Kindly don't. How is fake results going to fulfill the goals of beneficence and responsibility? So be honest and accurate. The fourth ethical principle is justice. Enhance all people's access, everybody's access to the benefits of psychological knowledge. Do you know, as far as learning and knowledge dissemination is concerned, there is a lot of inequality in this world? What do you think I mean by that? Knowledge ज़्यादातर किन के पास पहुंचती है? Knowledge generate करने में and knowledge receive करने में there is a lot of inequality. What am I talking about? Can someone explain my statement? Yes, Rohit?
Ma'am, I think so. Discrimination and biases and prejudices we have, and the insecurity we have within to give our knowledge to others who don't share same value like us.
Yes, yes. Where many a times we want to hoard our knowledge. We forget कि हमें सिखाया गया था कि विद्या बांटने से बढ़ती है, घटती नहीं है. It's not like money. Yes, Nandini?
I think what we consider like formalized knowledge in itself also depends on who is saying it, because a lot of these disciplines have been quite ethnocentric in nature. And I think that also contributes to us believing that one person who has, like a certain background or a certain characteristics just might inherently be more knowledgeable
Yes.
than other people.
Yes. Even the way we label people as knowledgeable and ignorant stems from our biases. You know, someone who looks well-to-do, wearing specs, wearing a suit, very knowledgeable. Someone who is wearing old torn clothes and chappals, ये तो ignorant ही होंगे. So हाँ, वो हमारे those are our preconceived notions and stereotypes. You see, knowledge usually reaches those people who are already literate, already educated, already rich, and doesn't seem to reach those people who are vulnerable and marginalized. Those people who could benefit the most from knowledge never seem to get access to it. So one part of being a researcher is that if you come up with credible knowledge, make sure it reaches as many people as possible so that they can benefit from it, whether they belong to a vulnerable group or a mainstream group or a marginalized group. Okay, now let's come to the fifth one. The fifth one is respect. Whether you are an expert psychologist or not, you have to respect people's dignity, their rights to confidentiality, and their right to self-determination. Is there any term here that I should explain? Dignity, confidentiality, and self-determination?
Can you elaborate on self-determination?
Self-determination is basically agency, a person's right to decide the course of their life. Determine the course of their own life is self-determination. Okay. We will talk, you will understand the relevance of self-determination when I talk about the concept of informed consent. But when someone else is taking all the decisions for you and telling you कि आप life में क्या कर सकते हैं और क्या नहीं कर सकते, they are robbing you of self-determination. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Now, there we come to a very important, this is at the heart of everything, the concept of informed consent. You know, often when we are conducting researches, we have to invite people to participate. कि आइए हमारी research में हिस्सा लीजिए, fill out our questionnaires, give us an interview, click photos for us. But before people agree to participate, before they give their final yes, you must make sure that you explain all important things to them. Give them all necessary information about the research, and only once they have the information, then they can agree to participate or decide to stay away. You are providing them information and then asking for their consent. That is why this process is called informed consent. What all do you have to tell the participants? Ideally, in a utopian world, you have to tell your participants the purpose of your study and all the procedures of your study. But the purpose of my study is to see the effect of heat on people's mood. So I have to tell them that I will make you sit in a heated room. Okay? Or you have to tell the other people that I will make you sit in a frozen room, because I want to see the effect of heat and temperature on behavior. Study, अपने purpose भी बताइए, procedures भी बताइए. Another thing you must tell people is what benefit they will get if they participate in the research. Will they learn something about themselves? Will they get some kind of funding? Will they get some kind of monetary exchange? Will they get credits for their course? What will they get? And even more importantly, you have to tell them the risks. So bataiye that I will be making you sit in a room when the temperature is 45 degrees. You can get dehydrated, you can faint, you will feel extremely hot. Risks bataiye. Despite the risks, if the person wants to participate in your research, phir to theek hai. But once they hear the risk, if they want to back out, they are fully entitled to back out. Your participant has the right to decline participation. Okay. And initially, if they agree to participate, but later they start to feel uncomfortable, they have the right to withdraw. And you cannot put any penalty on them. You cannot say कि आपने मेरे research से withdraw कर लिया है, अभी मैं आप पे case करती हूँ, ये आपने कैसे कर दिया? No. It is the right of the participant to withdraw at any point of time. The other part of informed consent that you have to tell your participant, and this is what participants feel very comforted by, is that their responses will be kept confidential. Okay? That nowhere will you as the researcher go publicly and say, oh, you know, वो Aisha है ना, उसने मुझे ये बताया, or या वो जो Gagan है ना, he shared this about his personal life with me. No. Even when you're writing a research paper, आप participants के names नहीं डालते हैं research paper में, because you have promised them confidentiality and anonymity. अगर आपको names डालने हैं, you put fake names. You don't put the real names. Then there is one question about informed consent that, okay, Rohit, I'll tell you about procedure. If your participants are children or people who are incapacitated in some way, or they have serious mental illness and they cannot give consent themselves, you will have to take consent from the parent or the guardian. Because people with mental health problems, people with children are vulnerable groups. इनके साथ तो informed consent आपको लेना ही लेना है. And if a child is too young to give it, you will have to take the informed consent from the parents. Okay, any questions about this slide? Procedure, Rohit, I just meant that whatever steps you will be doing in the study, you need to tell those steps to the participant. So if one step is that they will have to sit in a room where the temperature is 50 degrees Celsius, you have to inform them in advance that aisa karna padega, so that they can decide whether they want to go through something like that or not. Okay, any questions? Anything that was unclear? Did I speak too fast? Are we good to move on?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you know, we have to ideally tell the purpose and procedure. But a lot of times, you know, if we tell that, it might influence our study because the participant may know and, you know, share their responses according to that. So, you know, when do we decide? Do we do a cost benefit analysis during that time too?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I'm going to tell you about that. You have preempted something very important. I will tell you about that. Okay. So when you take informed consent, what procedure do we follow in my college is that if a participant has to decide कि उनको हमारी research में हिस्सा लेना है या नहीं, we first verbally explain everything to them, point by point, and keep saying that, look, you're going to participate. If you have any questions, तो हमसे पूछ लो, अपने clarification seek कर लो. So once they hear us out and they feel कि हाँ, I can participate, then we give them a written informed consent form, जिसमें whatever we explained is also in written. It also includes our contact information and our signature. We ask them to read the form. This is a sample of such a form. इसमें purpose of the study लिखा है, procedure के बारे में लिखा है, duration और location, risks, benefits सब लिखा है. We say आप पढ़ लो. And if you find it okay, you are okay to participate, I've signed it, you as my participant also sign it. 2 copies of the informed consent form are created and signed. एक participant को दे दी जाती है, एक हम अपने पास रखते हैं. सिर्फ verbal consent लेना is not enough. You have to take written informed consent. और जहां आप written नहीं ले पा रहे हैं, you should have a very clear cut reason for doing so. Okay. Now, this brings me to a tricky and gray area called deception. There is something very ironical about psychological research. ये इतना लंबा दिया हुआ है informed consent पे, आप subject को सब कुछ बताइए, participant को सब कुछ बताइए. The only problem, like I think was it Anupriya who shared, is that kabhi when you tell the purpose of the study to the participant becomes aware of what you are doing. And then instead of behaving like their natural selves, they start to behave like good boys or good girls. उनका behavior बड़ा artificial हो जाता है because they know what you are studying. तो फिर तो आपकी study की कोई value ही नहीं है. Because people know what you're trying to find out and they start behaving accordingly. They're just not themselves anymore. So, despite the whole concept of informed consent, psychologists don't always follow it in totality. Confidentiality का assure कर देंगे, anonymity का कर देंगे, but many a times psychologists do not tell the subject the real purpose of the study. And when you hide or you lie about the real purpose of the study, that is essentially deception. For anyone who's comfortable with Hindi here, what is the Hindi translation of deception? Yes, Rohit?
Dena, maybe.
What?
Dhoka.
Dhoka dena. Yeah, when you're blindsiding someone. Absolutely. So, unfortunately, participants are regularly misled about the purpose of the study. Scientists could withhold information, ठीक है, या तो कुछ बताया ही नहीं, या provide inaccurate information, clear cut झूठ बोल दिया. So either you're withholding the truth or you are blatantly lying in the name of science and knowledge. There is a very famous example of Darley and Latane study. Darley and Latane study is a study from social psychology. Have any of you heard of it? The participants were blatantly lied to about the purpose of the study. इनका नाम सुना है किसी ने? Okay, I will give you lots of examples of unethical studies from psychology. Time बच जाएगा तो I'll tell you about Darley and Latane also. Darley and Latane study is one of the most famous studies in psychology, in which the subjects were not told the true purpose of the experiment and were clearly deceived till the end of the experiment. The use of deception in psychology is very, very controversial because it violates totally the principles of informed consent. IC here stands for informed consent. लेकिन जो deception करते हैं, they argue that sometimes that is the only way to get authentic data. अगर आप लोगों को बता देंगे what you are trying to study, it may just alter the participants' behavior. Everybody will become the good boy and the good girl. इसीलिए हमको deceive करना पड़ता है. But we are given a very clear-cut guideline. As a researcher, you should only deceive when no other alternative is possible. जब आप बाकी सब कुछ ट्राई कर चुके हैं और वो वर्क नहीं करेगा, तभी आपको डिसेप्शन का यूज करना चाहिए. And secondly, when the benefits of deception and your deceiving study will be outweighing the costs. These are the two conditions under which chalo use deception, nahi to ideally not. So the Milgram experiment, social loafing one, Darley and Latane is the bystander effect, not social loafing. Alisha, Milgram experiment we will just come to. Okay, नाउ अब किसी को डिसीव करा आपने, झूठ झाट बोलकर आपने उनको अपनी स्टडी में पार्टिसिपेट तो करा दिया. You have violated informed consent. You have done something wrong. How do you compensate for it? What do you do? Once you deceive a participant, it becomes your moral obligation to engage in another process, which we call debriefing. Okay? At the end of the study, you will have to engage in debriefing. Debriefing is that now the research is over. There is nothing, you got what you wanted your data, you got it. Are you still going to keep your participant in the dark? Are you still going to let the lies continue? No, you're not supposed to. So at the end of the experiment, the process of debriefing means giving participants in the completed research project, kyunki ab to complete ho gaya, a full explanation of the study in which they participated. Much fuller explanation of the study than was possible before or during the research. Essentially, जो चीजें आपने पहले छुपाई थी, you need to tell them now, and you need to explain to them कि आपने उनसे झूठ क्यों बोला. Sometimes participants will get upset, and that is the cost you pay of deceiving them. They could very well turn around and say, I'll never trust a researcher again. You will have to live with the guilt of that. Another thing that you have to engage in before the participant leaves is a wellness check. आपको देखना चाहिए कि आपकी रिसर्च की वजह से कहीं पार्टिसिपेंट को कोई फिजिकल या इमोशनल हार्म तो नहीं हुआ. Like for example, are they feeling sad after giving the interview to you? Did you trigger something in them by taking the interview? If you have, then you need to address those issues, support and help your participant till they are feeling okay, and only then exit the research situation. So debriefing and wellness check is an integral part of being a researcher, especially if you have engaged in deception. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Yes. Cost means negative consequence. Bilkul. Any questions or confusion so far? Are you being able to follow what I am explaining?
Yes, ma'am, completely.
Okay. And I just hope that the difference between deception and debriefing and the relationship between deception and debriefing is clear to everyone. Yes, Rohit?
मैम डीब्रीफिंग माने मतलब ये है क्या कि डिसेप्शन मतलब रिसर्च पूरा होने के बाद डेटा जनरेट करने के बाद ऑथेंटिक डेटा जनरेट करने के बाद जो भी कुछ नुकसान होता है, कुछ तकलीफ होती है, उसकी कुछ भरपाई देनी पड़ती है क्या रिसर्चर को?
वैसे तो भरपाई तब भी देनी चाहिए अगर कोई तकलीफ ना हुई हो, कोई नुकसान ना हुआ हो. अब्रॉड में तो यूजुअली अगर आपके यहाँ कोई पार्टिसिपेट करता है रिसर्च में तो आपको कुछ उनको देना ही पड़ता है. आप पैसे देते हैं या उनके कोर्स क्रेडिट्स बढ़ जाते हैं, उनको कुछ नंबर मिल जाते हैं अपनी पढ़ाई में. तकलीफ हो या ना हो, हमें कुछ तो देना चाहिए पार्टिसिपेंट्स को. लेकिन डिसेप्शन में खासकर आपको देना पड़ेगा. पैसे वगैरह तो सब ठीक है, साथ में आपको जानकारी भी देनी पड़ेगी. डिसेप्शन में आपने उनसे झूठ बोला था. अपना डेटा कलेक्ट करने के बाद जब आपकी रिसर्च समाप्त हो गई है, आपको उनको जानकारी देनी पड़ेगी, उस सच्चाई बतानी पड़ेगी कि आपने उनसे पहले झूठ बोला था, एक्चुअल पर्पस स्टडी का ये था. और ये भी बताना पड़ेगा कि आपको झूठ बोलने की जरूरत क्यों लगी, ताकि एंड में एटलीस्ट उनको ये ना लगे कि उनको बिल्कुल ही टोटली ही धोखा दिया गया है. Okay. Another aspect of ethics is your participants are entitled to know the results of your research. If they ask you कि आपको अपनी रिसर्च पे मिला क्या, you cannot tell them कि मैं नहीं बताऊंगी, मेरे पास टाइम नहीं है, oh it is a secret. You have to tell the results. So the simplest way is कि आप जो informed consent form sign कराते हैं ना, उसमें अपनी contact information डाल दीजिए और आप बोलिए उनको participant को that if you want to know the findings, get in touch with me. ये मेरा phone number है, ये मेरा email ID है. But according to the APA, this is too passive. बस अपना phone number दे दिया और चलते बने. You should do more to make sure that your participants get the information. आप एक वेबसाइट या सोशल मीडिया पेज क्रिएट कर सकते हैं where you can post the findings and वो लिंक अपने पार्टिसिपेंट्स को जरूर भेजो. फाइंडिंग्स में किसी पार्टिसिपेंट का नेम नहीं डालोगे, बस ओवरऑल फाइंडिंग्स, बिकॉज सोशल मीडिया पेज तो पब्लिक डोमेन में हो सकता है. सो फाइंडिंग्स डाला, किसी का नेम नहीं डाला, वो लिंक अपने पार्टिसिपेंट को दे दो. ऑल्सो इफ यू वर्कड विद एनी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन टू डिस्ट्रीब्यूट योर क्वेश्चनर्स, you can take the organization's help also in sharing the findings. email IDs organization के पास होंगी participants की, तो उनको आप overall results mail कर सकते हो. Whatever you share with the participants should be concise and understandable. Okay, I am a psychologist. मेरे को psychologist ये के सारे concepts आते हैं, मेरे को सारा statistics भी आता है, पर मेरे participants को तो नहीं आता ना. I have to put the findings across in a language that my participants can easily understand. Otherwise, उनको results भेजने का फायदा क्या अगर उनको समझ ही नहीं आने वाले तो. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? I will just put on my PPT again. Why body of ethics never came in India? अरे हमने काम ही नहीं करा है इस चीज पे. ये हमारी जिम्मेदारी है to make such a board. जिस दिन हम बनाएंगे वो आ जाएगा. It's just that अभी तक ऐसा हुआ नहीं है. जिस तरह बहुत चीजों की तरफ हमने कदम नहीं लिया है, इस चीज की भी तरफ नहीं लिया है. हमने गे मैरिज को क्यों नहीं लीगलाइज करा है इंडिया में? नहीं करा, नहीं बनाया है बोर्ड ऑफ एथिक्स. बनाना चाहिए. Okay. Any thoughts that are going on in your mind right now that you probably want to share? Anything that's going on in your mind that you want to tell me?
I have a question.
Yes.
So since we are supposed to give informed consent, we are supposed to receive informed consent. What if during deception a person may get really angry and may want to press charges, or even if we don't follow ethical consideration somehow and they want to press charges against the researchers, can people do that?
Yeah, people can do that. They can do that. And you have to then handle the situation very sensitively. I mean, if there is some protection that your institution offers you, तो फिर तो ठीक है. But if your institution doesn't offer you protection and some charges are put against you, then you will have to handle that situation as sensitively, as gently as possible. I would say कि कभी ऐसी research मत करो जिसमें ऐसे chances होंगे that you are going to hurt someone so badly that they will press charges against you. It is not worth it. Mild forms of deception ठीक है. कि चलो मैंने आपको ये नहीं बताया कि गर्मी पे है, मैंने आपको ये बताया that oh I just want to see how you interact with other people. I didn't tell you कि the room will be very hot. इस तरह की deception चलो फिर भी कर ली तो कर ली. Nobody will press charges अगर आपने उनको गर्मी में बिठा दिया. Just make sure they don't have a health condition before that. But ऐसी नौबत आनी ही नहीं चाहिए where your deception was so serious that the person wants to press charges against you, because you will be in trouble after that.
Right. So I wanted to know, do people have the agency to be able to do that?
The people can. If you feel violated, yeah, you will go to the cops. Why not?
All right.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so I will briefly tell you a little also about animal ethics. Mind you, I have just focused on APA. BPS के अपना ethical protocol है, but it is very similar to APA. And because हम APA ज़्यादा use करते हैं, that's what I've covered in the session. I want to tell you a little about animal research. Over the years, I think when you love animals, you are even more human. Interacting with animals can bring out even greater humanity in you. Animals have been put through a lot of pain and such horrible procedures so that medicines and vaccines can be created for you and me. They have given up their life, animals have given up their health so that you and I can live longer. And the realization has come very late to us that if using animals is unavoidable, at least we can do this much, that we give them the least possible pain. Try to keep them as comfortable as possible. This realization has come to us late, but it has finally come. So let's briefly take a stock of animal ethics in psychology. For this, I will just put on my screen again. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Okay, what have we learned about working with animals? According to the APA, animals are a part of about 7 to 8% of psychological research done each year. And the animals that we tend to use the most are rodents and birds. And now we have started to understand that animals need to be treated well. And even when we conduct research on them, the benefits of whatever pain we cause them should outweigh the costs. But you know, the kind of decisions we have to make with animals, sometimes we have to kill them so that our research reaches its completion. And those decisions are never easy to make. Is it really okay to inject a drug in an animal that will impair its memory forever? Is it really okay? No, it's not okay. And yet we do it. If we have to do it, what are some of the things we can keep in mind when we work with animals? Let's take stock of that. So APA has given very detailed guidelines of what to do when you are working with animals. Any procedure that is carried out on animals has to be reviewed by a local animal care committee to make sure that you are not being unnecessarily cruel towards the animal. People who are involved in transporting the animals to the research lab have to make sure that the animals get adequate food, water, ventilation on the way, and that there is no unnecessary stress on the animals. If any animals are to be trapped from the wild for your research, they should be trapped in a very humane manner, because you know, in poaching animals, the kind of traps that are used are horrendous, especially the traps that are used to catch tigers. The tigers are full of cuts and wounds and they bleed because of those traps. When alternative behavioral procedures are available, those that minimize the discomfort, whichever option minimizes the discomfort for the animal, that option should ideally be used. An animal which is in severe distress or pain, and the pain cannot be alleviated, आप उस दर्द को ठीक नहीं कर सकते, तो animal दर्द में रहेगा, and that pain is not even essential for the research. You should just euthanize the animal immediately, put the animal to sleep. Do not prolong the pain of the animal without rhyme or reason, just because the animal cannot say that I am in pain. And psychologists who do field research, so psychologists who go to the jungles or the zoos to work with animals and don't bring them into the lab, if you go into the animal's environment, then disturb the animal population as little as possible. Be as unobtrusive as possible. Okay? So the guidelines are very detailed. I've only shared some of them with you at the moment. Now that brings us to the last and an important component for us. Psychology में किस तरह की unethical researches हुई हैं in the past of psychology. अब ऐसी experiments allowed नहीं होती, but they have happened in the past. I'm going to give you 3 examples of the kind of experiments we should never do again. One of them is called Watson's Little Albert study. आपने एक है Milgram study on obedience, एक है Zimbardo's prison experiment. So I think one of you have heard of Milgram study. Any of these other studies that you've heard of? If you could just let me know in the chat box. So now Jisha, you said Milgram, right? Aware of first. Little Albert, Watson. Now I'm going to tell you about all 3. They all together give you a real perspective on what psychology has been up to. Watson से शुरू करते हैं. Watson I'm not going to explain. Watson I'm going to show you a video on. Try to see if you can understand through the video what this experiment was about. But I think I should put myself on mute for this. While the video is playing, if the sound is not there, can someone let me know through WhatsApp? Ishita?
Yeah, I'm here.
You let me know na if the sound is not playing.
Yeah, just make sure you're sharing the audio when you're sharing the screen. Just say it once and we'll see if it's audible or not. We can't hear it. You need to share your audio.
How do I do that?
Give me a second. You will have to share the screen again, and you will have an option of sharing your audio as well. Can you try that once, please?
Sure. Where does the option come?
It does come below somewhere. I don't
Share
exactly-
sound.
Yeah. Share sound.
Okay. I'll try now.
Welcome to Psychology is Nuts. You know, back in 1919, which was the early days of psychology still, Sigmund Freud had only stopped prescribing cocaine to his patients a couple decades before. A guy named John B. Watson wanted to find out if humans were born pre-programmed with emotions. Yeah, kind of like you, Troy. Or if we learn to develop emotions like fear based on experiences over the course of our lifetime. Basically, he wanted to find out if fear is an innate trait or not. And what better way to find out than by enlisting the help of a bouncing, apple-cheeked, cherub-lipped, 9-month-old baby boy. So Dr. Watson was a respected social psychologist at Johns Hopkins University. And as such, he got his hands on one of his underlings' 9-month-old sons, for which he paid the mother the princely sum of $1. He nicknamed the little boy Albert for the study. It was a pseudonym. And he began by introducing little Albert to all sorts of cute animals, like a friendly rat, a nice fluffy bunny, some friendly doggies, and even stuff that didn't move, like a Santa Claus mask and a sealskin fur coat. Now, Albert didn't seem afraid of any of this stuff. As a matter of fact, all of it seemed to become his pals. Even the monkey that hopped around a lot seemed to just inspire curiosity in Albert, definitely not fear. And so Dr. Watson had his baseline. But Albert's friendship with his old pals didn't last very long, and that's because Dr. Watson had a clever conditioning stimulus. Anytime Albert was introduced to his old friends, Watson was there right behind him with a piece of metal and a hammer, and he would bang them together right behind the baby's head. So when Albert got to see the bunny again, bang! Oh, hey, look, it's the hopping monkey who you used to love. Bang! It's Santa Claus. Bang! Each time, Dr. Watson was there with his hammer and his piece of metal to smack them together right behind Albert's head and terrify him. By the time the third phase of the experiment rolled around, little baby Albert didn't need a hammer to scare him. Anytime his friends were brought out, he would start to cry and try to crawl away in fear. But Albert was just a little baby, so he couldn't get very far. Anytime he did try to crawl off, Dr. Watson or his graduate student assistant would pull him back into place and push his old pals closer to him. Poor baby Albert. Whoa. Albert had proven Dr. Watson's hypothesis. Fear is a conditioned response. Dr. Watson never got around to desensitizing baby Albert. Instead, he ran off with his graduate assistant. And he burned all his notes in 1958. And he died without ever publicly naming baby Albert, because remember, baby Albert was a pseudonym. So for a lot of years, as psychologists got more ethics, they worried that there was some little old man out there who was terrified of bunnies and monkeys and Santa Claus and didn't know why. In 2010, though, a group of researchers found who they think baby Albert was. His name was Douglas Merritt, and he died tragically at age 6 of acquired hydrocephaly. And the worst part is, he was probably still scared of monkeys and bunnies and Santa Claus. And there you have it, another chapter in our book on the annals of psychology's wackiest experiments. Thanks for stopping by.
Okay, there you go. For those who hadn't known of this experiment earlier, did the video help you understand? Or should I explain to you the little Albert experiment?
Could you all respond in the chat or maybe through, give a reaction or something so that we know? Yeah.
Okay. So Watson was this researcher that wanted to see how we acquire certain emotions. How do we acquire fear? हमें चीजों से डर कैसे लगने लगता है? So for that, he brought a little baby into his lab and he called the baby Little Albert. This was a fake name. Little Albert was 1 year old and was a chilled baby. Okay. Little Albert was not scared of anything. They would show him lots of animals, a burning newspaper. Little Albert को डर ही नहीं लगता था. Little Albert was particularly fond of a white furry mouse. He was very friendly with the mouse. When Watson saw this, he started another phase in the experiment. Now, he brought the mouse to Albert. And जैसे ही Albert would start playing with the mouse, Watson would take make a loud banging noise behind the baby's head. He did this once, he did this twice, he did this thrice. Now what started to happen was, in the baby's mind, earlier though that white mouse was a very nice little thing, now he started to link that white mouse with that horrible sound he used to be scared of. The baby had been very scared of that sound. But अब that sound was bajowing every time the mouse would come. So baby के mind में तो दोनों link हो गए. And there came a time where as soon as the baby used to see the mouse, even without the loud sound, Albert would get scared and start crying. जो चीज उसको पसंद थी शुरू में, Watson ensured that the baby acquired a fear of that thing he used to earlier like. And unfortunately, that fear spread to all white furry things, including rabbits, including Santa's beard. Now, why is this whole experiment considered problematic? I've said it. I just want one of you to say it for me.
Ma'am, because forever Albert will be scared of those animals, like things from childhood go till the end until you actually treat them.
Is it okay to make someone scared of something they used to earlier enjoy? Would you like to do that to anyone? Would you like anyone to do that to you? No. But because Albert didn't have a voice, karte gaye. Okay. Now, let me come back to telling you about the second unethical experiment. My problem is that we have about 15 minutes left. I will try my best to finish on time. 1 minute. My PPT has decided to disappear. 1 second, please. So the second experiment that I want to tell you about is by a psychologist called Milgram, Stanley Milgram. And Stanley Milgram conducted his research somewhere post the Second World War. And you know, something that had fascinated him a lot was the way the Nazi soldiers had behaved during the Holocaust. What had the Nazi soldiers done? क्या करा था उन्होंने? What about the Nazi soldiers would you find very shocking whenever you were told about the Holocaust?
Very brutal.
Very brutal, yeah. Brutal towards someone who had murdered someone in their family, who had destroyed the life of the soldier. कुछ ऐसा था क्या?
No, to everybody.
To innocent people. The soldiers had so easily, in gas chambers, killed innocent Jews. जब ट्रायल में पूछा गया German army general से, soldiers से, why did you do it? How could you kill an innocent person, a child, an old man, an old woman, a pregnant woman? Their response was, I was just following orders. Then Milgram got very fascinated and he said, अच्छा, human beings इतने ज़्यादा obedient होते हैं कि उनको कुछ भी बोलो order के नाम पे और वो कर लेंगे. Some person in authority says, इसको जला दो, उसको जला दो, उसको मार दो, और लोग कर लेंगे क्योंकि authority figure ने बोला है. That idea really fascinated him and he wanted to check it out. So he designed a study called the obedience study, because the German soldiers had said, "Hum to obedient ho rahe the, we were just following orders." This study was conducted in 1961. The study dealt with obedience to authority. It was his belief that study like this could avoid another Holocaust. In this study, deception was involved. All the participants were told that they were participating in a learning and memory का task. इस task में वो teacher थे. उनको बताया गया कि आप teacher का role play करोगे. Randomly decide करा गया, you are the teacher. और एक और person होगा, that will be the learner. ठीक है? And as a teacher, आप learner से questions पूछना. जब भी the learner makes a mistake, give the learner an electric shock. सो इफ आई एम द पार्टिसिपेंट, मुझे बोला गया है मैं टीचर हूं, वहां लर्नर बैठा है, उससे सवाल पूछो, जब भी वो गलत जवाब देता है आपको उसको शॉक देना है. सो आई एम लाइक ओके. एक्चुअली जो लर्नर था दैट वाज अ कन्फेडरेट ऑफ द एक्सपेरिमेंटर. वो कोई एक्चुअल लर्नर नहीं था, कोई एक्चुअल पार्टिसिपेंट नहीं था, वो एक्सपेरिमेंटर से मिला जुला हुआ था और कोई शॉक वॉक का एक्चुअली सिस्टम नहीं था. ये तो बस मुझे बताया जा रहा था कि मुझे उसको शॉक देना है और मैं मान गई, मैं तो सच ही मानूंगी. सो और ना थोड़ा सा पार्टिसिपेंट्स को शॉक दिया भी गया, ये देखो ऐसा शॉक देना होगा आपको उसको. तो मेरे को थोड़ा सा शॉक उन्होंने एक्चुअली दे दिया, सो दैट आई बिलीव कि मैं शॉक करने वाली हूं उस पर्सन को. दिस इज अ फोटोग्राफ ऑफ अ पर्सन बीइंग कन्विंस्ड कि देखिए इस तरह का शॉक आपको देना पड़ेगा. चलो, अब लर्नर जानबूझ के कभी कभी करेक्ट आंसर्स देते थे और कभी कभी गलत आंसर्स देते थे. और जब गलत आंसर्स देते थे तो एज अ पार्टिसिपेंट आई वुड हैव टू एडमिनिस्टर शॉक. एक और इंस्ट्रक्शन दी गई पार्टिसिपेंट्स को कि फॉर एवरी नेक्स्ट मिस्टेक यू हैव टू इंक्रीज द इंटेंसिटी ऑफ द शॉक. हर गलती पर आपको शॉक की इंटेंसिटी बढ़ानी है. तो learners periodically gave wrong answers, and as the shock increased, so called increased, और मुझे लग रहा है कि मैं शॉक ज्यादा करके दे रही हूं हर गलती पे, the learner started to cry, started to moan and started to beg कि बंद करो मुझे शॉक देना, I can't take it anymore. As the Confederates' cries became louder, some participants wanted to stop, क्योंकि उनको दिख रहा था कि लर्नर को बहुत डिस्कम्फर्ट हो रहा है. बट द रिसर्चर इन द रूम टेल्स द पार्टिसिपेंट, नहीं, यू गो ऑन, यू प्लीज गो ऑन, डोंट स्टॉप गिविंग शॉक. द एक्सपेरिमेंट वाज एक्चुअली ट्राइंग टू डिटरमिन कि पार्टिसिपेंट्स कितना हाई शॉक देंगे if the researcher keeps telling them नहीं आप दो, बढ़ाओ, till what limit will people keep shocking? And one very unfortunate finding was that many participants, 65% participants, continued to increase the shock to the highest shock intensity even though the learners were now crying. और आपको लगता है ये कितने इनह्यूमन लोग रहे होंगे, शॉक देते गए ऑल्दो सामने वाला रो रहा था. बट द ट्रूथ ऑफ द मैटर इज दैट फॉर मेनी पार्टिसिपेंट्स जो टीचर के रोल में थे, दे वर नॉट इनह्यूमन. फॉर देम द एक्सपीरियंस वाज वेरी हॉरिबल, वेरी इमोशनल एंड फिल्ड विद कॉन्फ्लिक्ट कि मैं रिसर्चर की सुनूं जो यहाँ एक्सपर्ट है या मैं लर्नर की सुनूं जो रो रहा है. The experiment was actually very traumatic for these participants, and that's why इस experiment को unethical माना जाता है. कि आपने लोगों को ये feeling दी कि वो किसी और को torture कर रहे हैं. उसके बाद what did Milgram do? Milgram took precautions to debrief each participant. हर participant को समझाया गया कि कोई shock नहीं था, it was all acting. No long-lasting negative effects were found. ऐसा नहीं है कि लॉन्ग टर्म में कोई भी पार्टिसिपेंट ट्रॉमेटाइज हुआ, बट डिस्पाइट दैट दिस काइंड ऑफ रिसर्च वुड नेवर बी अलाउड टुडे. दिस वाज द ओबीडियंस स्टडी. लेट्स कम टू द फाइनल स्टडी फॉर टुडे. ऐसी ही एक और स्टडी जो खासा ही प्रॉब्लमैटिक थी. That is called the Stanford Prison Experiment, जो स्टैनफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी में हुई थी, and that is why the name Stanford, conducted in 1971 by a young upcoming professor जिनका नाम था Philip Zimbardo. Philip Zimbardo was very interested in knowing कि imprisonment के, जेल में होने के psychological effects क्या होते हैं. Being in a jail, what does that make you like? What does that pull out of you? तो इन्होंने स्टैनफोर्ड के अंदर ही एक फेक प्रिजन बनाई, ओके, और उन्होंने कॉलेज स्टूडेंट्स को रिक्रूट करा टू कम इनटू दिस सेटिंग व्हिच लुक्ड लाइक अ प्रिजन. Some college students, all of whom volunteered for this study, were given the role of guards prison guards and दूसरों को दिया गया role of prisoners. So कुछ students को, and all these students were tested psychologically, they were all average in any way. किसी को कोई psychological mental health problem नहीं थी. कुछ को guard का role दे दिया गया, कुछ को prisoner का role दे दिया गया. Astonishingly, even though the prison was fake, the guards were fake, the prisoners were fake, suddenly it all became very real. These fake guards started to take their role very, very seriously and started to become very coercive and rude towards the prisoners. So much so that some guards started to also engage in psychological and physical torture of the prisoners. And the prisoners accepted the abuse as if they would in a real jail. कि हम क्या कर लेंगे इनके खिलाफ. By officers' request, these prisoners also harassed and troubled the other prisoners who were trying to stop the harassment from the guards. Zimbardo saw all this. He was playing the role of warden of the prison. He saw all this torture happening and did not do anything to stop it. And that is the shocking part. The experiment was supposed to continue for 2 weeks और वो चलती ही रहती और torture भी चलता रहता, but it was abandoned after 6 days because a graduate student who later became his wife, Christina Maslach, objected and said, "What the hell are you doing? Stop. What kind of knowledge are you generating by allowing torture to happen?" And that's when Zimbardo stopped. This turned out to be an ethically very problematic experiment, right? Because the prisoners were put through so much psychological harm. One prisoner actually had to be released 36 hours after the experiment began because he was uncontrollably screaming and crying. Zimbardo, shockingly, had not stopped the experiment on his own. In Zimbardo's defense, the emotional distress experienced by the prisoners could not have been predicted by him from the outset. Zimbardo ने ऐसा कुछ predict और expect नहीं करा था. He had also looked for other methods to conduct this experiment, but nothing suitable could be found. तभी उसने ये format choose करा. उसके बाद उसने extensive debriefing sessions भी करे और ये भी establish करा that there were no long-lasting effects. अपनी तरफ से फिर Zimbardo ने सब कुछ करा, but even today, this is considered one of the most unethical experiments in psychology. So these are 3 examples of exactly the kind of research you should not be conducting. Okay, I was also asked to just explain the meaning of an institutional review board to you. मैं आपको briefly बता देती हूँ. कुछ institutions में boards होते हैं of scholars and researchers. और कोई भी अगर उस इंस्टीट्यूशन में रिसर्च होती है तो सबसे पहले रिसर्च का प्रपोजल IRB के पास आता है. वो देखते हैं कि इसमें कोई एथिकल इशू तो नहीं है डिजाइन में, मेथोडोलॉजी में, सैम्पलिंग में, एंड ओनली इफ देयर इज नो एथिकल इशू तभी उस रिसर्च को परमिशन दी जाती है टू गो ऑन. इफ एनी एथिकल कंसर्न इज फाउंड, द रिसर्चर इज मेड टू ईदर मॉडिफाई द स्टडी or drop the study. So basically the job of the IRB is to ensure that the proposal is an ethical one in nature. Okay. Well, और बहुत ethics होते हैं. They are the ethics of how there is also this whole idea of how will you report your ethical practices in your research paper? How do we write ethically? But I think I won't go into that right now. I've given you enough information for one session. So I will now stop and see if you have any questions or comments. You're absolutely right. Seligman's learned helplessness experiment was also very cruel because it gave shock to dogs and made them helpless. Yes, that's another problematic experiment. Okay, so I think that's all I'll share with you today. And if you have any questions at this point of time or any feedback, you're most welcome to share. What I didn't get the time to cover with you was how I would write about my ethical practices in my research paper. And ethical writing क्या होता है, जैसे plagiarism avoid करना या properly cite करना. I haven't been able to cover that. That's a story for another day. Yes, Anupriya.
Hi. So I wanted to ask that, you talked about how faking data is unethical, but is it only on the person's, is there any way to know if the person has fake data? Is it a way it's reviewed, or is just person's own concise?
The only way is to ask for the raw data. I mean, if you claim that you have got 100 questionnaires filled, I may want to see those 100 questionnaires. And I may then, if I'm really suspecting that the 100 questionnaires were filled out by the same person, I need to raise my voice and I need to challenge the researcher and say that I feel this is fake. But access to the raw data would probably be the only way of establishing whether the data was authentic or not.
So it's not like a procedure that, every research has to be checked. It's just if I find that maybe this is something fishy, then okay.
Or if you write a paper and send it to a journal for publishing, they don't check the raw data most of the time. You can, honestly speaking, get away with it, which is sad, but that's just the way it is.
Alright, okay.
Yes, Rohit?
नमस्ते ये फोरेंसिक साइकोलॉजी में यही सेम एथिक्स इस्तेमाल किए जाते हैं क्या, अगर कुछ एक्सपेरिमेंट करना हो वगैरह?
बिल्कुल 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 बिल्कुल, ये सारे जो एथिक्स आज डिस्कस करे गए हैं साइकोलॉजी के हर फील्ड पे लागू होते हैं. आप फोरेंसिक करें, आप सोशल करें, आप हेल्थ साइकोलॉजी करें, सब पर लागू होते हैं. Okay, any further questions? Okay, then I guess I'm done. We're done for today.
Thank you so much for that very, very interesting session. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope everyone did it too. I'll just stop the recording now. And do you want to share maybe an email address or something where everyone can contact you if they have any questions?
Yeah.
You can share that in the chat. If anybody has any questions, further questions, they can email you.